Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by SDR Pods. Learn how we can build you a fully equipped sales development team to execute on personalized multi-channel prospecting and book you more meetings at the link below. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast. One of the most important things a sales team can have is standard messaging and common ideas around your company's offering. Sometimes that's something that sales leadership defines. Sometimes it's something that comes down through marketing. But sometimes sales reps are just kind of left to their own devices and tasked with coming up with, the value props, the verbiage, and messaging all on their own. But according to my guest, that's all wrong. If you don't want issues with adoption, cohesion, and scalability, you need to bridge that gap between sales and marketing. I'm your host, Sarah Hicks, and today on the Predictable Revenue Podcast, I'm going to be chatting to an expert about strategic alignment, driving communication, cohesion, and adoption across sales and marketing. Currently the Director of Sales and Business Development at QuickBase, her wide array of experience across sales and organizations makes her the perfect person to do the job, and of course, this podcast. After doing stints in sales, sales operations, sales development, demand gen, go-to-market strategy, sales and marketing management, team building, cold call training, client prospecting, and building strong sales teams, she's truly done it all. And she's actually been a guest on our show before. So it's the second time for everybody. Excited to have her back. Right now, she's running a few teams dedicated to inbound and outbound sales development and is going back to basics, or should I say quick basics, simplifying their focus to uncover what practical things they can do at the top of the funnel to improve their revenue conversion rates. Welcome, Kim Brown.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. I'm like overwhelmed by that intro. Thanks.
You're so welcome. Yeah, as I mentioned, guys, Kim has been on the show before. We'll make sure to include a link to her other episode so you can hear kind of the journey that she's been on and hear a different perspective from a different company. But anyway, for today's episode, Kim, tell us a little bit about that background and experience across all those different sales teams within the sales ecosystem.
Yeah, I've worked in the tech startup space for a majority of my sales career. And so when you work for startups, it's a lot of all hands on deck. I started in sales development as a cold caller, but I'd had a lot of management experience prior to tech sales. And so kind of quickly moved up in leadership from there. And I think I talk a little bit about that in my last episode. So, as I've grown in my career, getting to really grow in sales development and business development, there's always like a natural alignment with marketing that kind of needs to happen. And I've really quickly seen a lot of those gaps play out. And I'm a big fan of I see the value of marketing. I see where sales wants to go. And so as my career grew, I started to really go into leadership areas of those places to kind of help bridge that gap. I was really passionate about it and of, jack of all trades, hopefully master of a couple, one or two in there. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah.
Awesome. And one of the kind of key differences that you mentioned coming into this new role as Director of Sales and Business Development at QuickBase is that you're now part of a very large sales ecosystem. You're working cross-functionally with a whole myriad of teams, whereas before you maybe had kind of easier organic alignment. Maybe on the sales floor with the marketing team, you could, tap them on the shoulder. You could have those conversations easily. But yeah, as I said, you're now working as part of a very large group of teams. So what does your role in sales development now look like in such a large organization?
Yeah, that's a great call out. Yeah, because when I mentioned the startup piece, because it was exactly that, just concentrated areas. It was easy to have that alignment of marketing when I ran marketing and demand gen, for example, and also ran sales development. It was easier because it all funneled up to me. It had parts and pieces in those that reported to me. But here, all the kind of parts and pieces of functions that I've kind of had and others on top of that, there's groups in QuickBase that do all those things. And I've been at QuickBase for 2.5 months now, and short amount of time, but learned a lot. These are such great groups that we're so aligned on how to do the right things well, and we're all driving to that. And so I get to now be at a large scale for sales and business development, about 40 folks. and 4 different teams that all dedicated to where I started and where my passion has always been from the beginning. Like I wanted to drive marketing efforts to fill like the need of sales development that would then feed the needs of sales. And so now to get to do that, but now I work with all these different great support and revenue producing organizations to go there. And it's like my scope really has broadened and specialized at the same time.
Interesting. So you mentioned 40 people. That's 40 people that you're directly managing, right? So how is your team broken up? Who are all those people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've got 4 different teams. One is our dedicated inbound team, and then the other 3 are strictly outbound. So that's how we're framed up. We're definitely exploring options to maybe go hybrid in the future, but it's a big lift. And it's a hot topic for a lot of folks in this world of like, what's the right play? And I think it depends on the company.
Definitely.
Yeah. Then our outbound teams are structured by business segment, and we do like by company size, like mid-market, enterprise. We've got a couple like specialized groups on like the top tier and new markets. So yeah, That's kind of how we're structured.
Awesome. So 40 people split into kind of predominantly inbound, outbound, but then there's kind of more segmentation beyond that. Okay. And what are the other teams within this large sales organization that you're in at QuickBase now?
Yeah. So then the other like closing teams are all those business segments. There's small to medium business, mid-market, enterprise, emerging markets. So those segment teams on my outbound team are intended to directly align with each of those, which is really great. Then we also have a fantastic like customer success and like renewals account management organization too, that supports that, and your usual like solutions consulting and implementation teams. So yeah, feel like we've got it all.
Yeah. Do you have people that are dedicated to kind of like sales ops or sales enablement at your company?
Yes. Yeah, that's the other part of it. So we're a go-to-market org, a revenue org. Last couple of years, I'm seeing more and more of like, we're calling it revenue. You know, it's the revenue organization, the go-to-market organization. So we have a very large and really, just a rigorous sales ops, go-to-market ops organization where we focus on the strictly sales ops, but customer ops, but programs and tactics and campaigns that align really closely with marketing, and then sales enablement, and tools. I'm missing somebody I'll probably listen to later. I'm like, they're in there. It's amazing how much they've set up here at QuickBase. I feel really lucky.
Yeah. It makes sense that with so many people, even if you're just looking at kind of your outbound team as an indicator of kind of the company as a whole, it makes sense that to have such a large team, it's complicated, and there are kind of complex workings that go beyond the ability of just the SDRs. You've got to get those ops people, you got to get the enablement people to kind of come in.
And I've even explained how marketing works. It's like a whole other
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely get into that. That's obviously where we want to go, but interesting to hear kind of all of the different teams that you're working amongst while you're at QuickBase. So in your kind of day-to-day, which teams do you have constant or daily communications with, or which ones do you think it's most important to have that kind of daily communication with?
Like cross-functionally, like so, I mean, sales leadership, and then like the managers, directors, VPs of the different segment groups is critical. And it's one of the key things I'm working on right now is how do we get them what they need? And classic sales scenario, if they don't have enough leads, they want more leads. If they've got a lot of leads, they want better quality leads. Sometimes there's always something, and it's our job and my job to like get them that whatever it is, but also like what the business needs. So that's really important. But outside of just that obvious one, I work a lot with our sales programs team and our sales enablement team, because there's higher turnover, more early on career people in sales and business development. And so enabling them, and then like defining the direction that they should go with their tactics and talk tracks with programs is really important. So the overall like sales ops teams is critical. And then our campaigns and product marketing teams and demand teams and marketing as well. Like I have daily or multiple times a week interaction with kind of all of those like 5 or 6 groups I mentioned.
Awesome. And would that be kind of scheduled one-on-ones or team meetings, or how do you kind of organize?
Yeah. So I think everyone, especially during these COVID times, we've got some really good kind of regular weekly cadences for a lot of the core things that we do. Reviewing different business segments where everyone from ops and marketing and business development, inbound, and sales all get together and review these segments on a weekly or bi-weekly. Marketing plays, the demand plays, where we have these things. Then we've got ongoing strategic projects that we're all working on that drive a lot of that. And then the core folks, I've got a handful of one-on-ones with some of these people. So it's a little bit of everything. I kind of would put it in like a 30-30-30 bracket, where like a third of my time is probably those weekly meetings, a third is these projects, and a third is like getting that one-on-one time just to make decisions and get moving.
Cool. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the relationship between sales and marketing. How at QuickBase, how does marketing influence what you guys do in sales development?
Yeah, I'd say it's a growing process. So marketing is a really critical piece, and it was before I got there, and it will like continue. I think what I'm looking to do is grow it and enhance it more for our top line goals of just increasing our revenue conversion rates, and really like part of our company, we're trying to strengthen and simplify our message a great deal. So, but our demand team, they're focused on everything that drives our inbound engine, and like without like everyday critical alignment on what they're doing and all the different tactics that they're running on inbound, our SDR team, I don't know where they'd be. So it's like lockstep the entire way, and constantly iterating and holding each other accountable to metrics. And then for the outbound teams, it works really critically with product marketing, which would have a lot of solution and portfolio research, and then like those ideas and strategies going to campaigns to run those top level goals. So the idea is that the focus areas that are established from campaigns and like product and portfolio marketing would drive a great deal of what a BDR is doing outbound focused. Not quite how it is today, and we're trying to get there, and trying to how do we align and bridge the gap, because today it's a lot of opinions, if I'm being honest, of like, here's the best thing from historical knowledge and how other people are winning, and how do we take more of like the work that's being done in marketing and make it digestible for sales and get that adoption.
Right. Okay. That's something that I want to speak on later too, is kind of how you get that adoption. But in an ideal world, once you've kind of got this process set up with marketing, how should they communicate that strategic focus effectively down to the sales development team?
Yeah. I'll be honest, we've got some things right, but we're figuring some of that out. I think one, we're always iterating. We're talking about what are the right things to do. Is it, a week-long training on a big new focus, or is it like an email drop and with some like quizzes, and I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. But we've got a few different triggers of like, and things that we're doing there, but it's like, okay, what is the overall why that we're doing this? What we're doing? Okay. But then like sales specific, who am I going after? How my book of business, who, like communicating and documenting like what part of your book of business this campaign or focus area should be going after, and then who in that do I prospect? Or sometimes it's reverse, like we're targeting these types of people and then in these areas, but for this general problem that we're solving. And so it's getting that content out there, enabling that with our enablement team, and then really testing a lot. We use a few different resources, like MindTickle, for example, to really validate that people are learning. And then having like outreach sequences and others like real like hands-on sales plays to ensure people are doing it. When we have all of that in place, we can see, do people do it, and what are the results there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Does that kind of answer your question? I might have hit around it, but
No, I think so. I mean, it sounds like
yeah.
you're still figuring this out. There's
Yeah.
a couple of ways that you think ideally it could work, but of course it comes down to your company and
Yeah.
how your people
Mhm.
respond. So you can kind of
Yeah.
try these, as you said, kind of email drops. So just getting it to them quickly, but maybe less personally, versus kind of these team training style things where they're hands-on and
Mhm.
learning that way. And as you
Yeah.
said, it's probably going to be some combination or some middle ground
Yeah.
there. But those are definitely great suggestions. And I think that's things that our listeners can give a go. And they should also
Yeah.
look for
Yeah.
the kind of the data to see what works for them. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier was that, of course, the strategic focus comes from marketing, but then it kind of goes through to the what were they called, the campaigns team, to kind of build the campaigns or the outreach, and then of course down to sales development. So the kind of marketing team would hone in on the ICP, but then there's a kind of trickle down before it gets to the actual outreach strategy.
Yeah.
How do you guys go along that road? What is the kind of step by step that you take there?
Yeah. Yeah. So we actually have some things that we've mapped out in this. So in that, what it will be, that like initial, like, here's our core focus areas. We always have like kind of a stakeholder alignment from more than just marketing that helps decide that. So that when marketing goes and executes on that and does that, we already have like sales and go to market ops like fully on board, as well as like our product and technical teams. So everyone's kind of bought in at a high level, and we digest that down. As we're building those things out, we've got it mapped out of like, okay, so we've got the themes, the people that are responsible for building the plays and the programs, they're early on getting eyesight into that and trying to build those things. And as they're building those things, okay, we're tying that in to the key sales leaders to start digesting and helping iterate as we build. And so we've kind of cross-functionally matrix style mapped who should be involved, what are their roles, so that even though it is like marketing owns it, then campaigns owns it, then programs owns it. The trick is to like be cross-functional outside of those owners the entire way.
Makes sense. You can't kind of silo and just pass it down. You've got to have the kind of constant feedback bouncing between each of those teams. But those are the three kind of key teams that go into building out that process.
Yeah, exactly. Like who owns it, who does it, but then you want this to land, like we've just learned, hard way, or for better or for worse, doing this is the part of the trick.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've kind of chatted about what marketing does that then feeds down to sales development, what they're kind of responsible for that gets passed on to sales development. What about the other way around? What about when sales development is kind of learning things from talking to the prospects? How do they communicate that back up the ladder effectively?
Yeah, I think that's another big one that I'm trying to bring some more like data-driven approaches to it. I think a challenge sometimes, especially for salespeople that may not, there's some that are very data and report driven, but there's a lot that maybe aren't, so that's why they're in sales maybe. Just poking some fun. But there's a lot of anecdotes. Everyone's got a story. The hard part with stories is that like they usually come from someone's existing opinion, and whether that opinion is backed up in the results and then the performance that we're seeing.
Right.
And so it's like, this campaign's not working, everyone hates it. Like, does everyone hate it, or do you hate it? And do you hate it for like quantifiable reasons, or is it a personal preference? How do we tell those things? Because I don't know. I like, that's usually in my glass half empty self, is like always wonders from that, unless I can see numbers. So part of what we're trying to incorporate now is when we have the meetings in place to have that cross-functional alignment in these business groups and different things like I've mentioned, but how do we drive more and more away from like anecdotes that may just be purely opinion based, and how do we drive to data? And right now we're just starting from basics of like, well, let me show the effort, like the calls, the emails, the meetings that all drive activities. And from those activities, like what was a positive yield that gets us closer to pipeline? And then like everyone's got their versions of sales accepted leads and marketing qualified leads and, like initial opportunities created. And so, but like seeing the effort that goes into it and then validate those conversion rates up to where the dollar sign starts showing up. And if you've got an anecdote, does that match like the different breakdowns of that data? Okay, this campaign isn't working. You're right. We see that. We've put just as much effort in this campaign as we did another one, but we're converting at 30% less on the number of meetings that we've booked there. Okay, so now let's go into some examples of that. Could my anecdotes from you like reside there? Like, let me go look at some real examples of like where we failed at the meetings, and like let me talk to those reps and get those anecdotes, because that's the feedback that I want, that drives exactly to the problem that we're seeing in these conversion rates.
Right. So looking at kind of, if you're tracking the metrics all the way down the pipeline and you can see where that bottleneck is, then you're speaking to those reps with the experience in exactly that area. And that kind of gives you confirmation or validation about what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause like every company's got their squeaky wheels, their loud voices. And I love those guys. Like, they have some of the most honest and raw feedback that we all need. And how do we harness that in a way that's like just avoiding the areas, and however big or small it is at your company, that like I want to like use that loud voice, how it's going to help us, and I don't want an opinion that may or may not be factual to affect the rest of the company poorly. Yeah. Because I've been a rep, I've been there. Like, sometimes you're having a hard time with a certain talk track, and it may or may not be that the talk track is bad. It may not be that the campaign is bad. It very well could be, and we've totally missed it throughout that entire matrix style filtering down. And we definitely want to capture that, because that happens. But how do we know that that's the case, and not just like you're having an off couple weeks and that has nothing to do with anything?
Right. So when you're looking to kind of survey and collect this data, are you having all of your outbound reps doing the same campaign over a certain amount of time so that you can track it? Or how do you sort of stage these experiments?
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking, of course, the inbound team is going to be more filtered to what the demand team is doing, which has a lot of correlations with the outbound plays as well. But we're starting to, like, with getting better and better at segmenting by teams on my end, like, and working with the different sales leaders. That piece is, okay, well, how does this overall macro theme of the company and of these like campaigns, how does that fit into the book of business for mid-market? Because it actually is very different from enterprise in a lot of ways, and some not as much, but sometimes it is. And so a lot of it's going to be the same campaigns for everybody, but what does that mean for your buyers, for your book of business? And then like our emerging markets team, or our new markets team, they're going after stuff that no one else in the company is going after. And so that's where we actually have to like break away from the mold a little bit. In a strategic way, in a thought out way, but we're trying to learn as much as possible instead of like sticking to the mold 100%.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So sort of when you're building out the test campaigns, you mentioned obviously each segment of the outbound team has a different focus on these different sized accounts. So would you have the messaging for the campaign be the same? And then at the end, you're able to see like, okay, this messaging worked really well for mid-market and not for enterprise? Or would you be making kind of tweaks to each of them so that they are kind of more appealing to each of their segments?
Yeah, I think what you just described is kind of where I'd like to go, where we could like do a better job of analyzing, okay, how does these campaigns run for mid-market? Like, you do that analysis, and that's some of what we'll start doing in the second half of our year. What we do have today that works really well for us is because we use a tool like Outreach, and there's a lot of other great tools like that. I've used many others, but we have like places for customizations. We have a really solid sales methodology that we've adopted, where like we're constantly driving in our account-based method to know what the priorities of a company are, and to be finding that, and to be finding the business impact as early on in the sales cycle as possible. And so we've incorporated places like in email templates, for example, and in talk tracks, where we are inserting those things and customizing the message. And so each segment team is responsible from their book of business to customize in those ways at scale.
Cool.
That's going to fit their book of business. So it's, I think, more account-based than like segment-based, but it ends up happening organically that way.
Right. Makes sense. So the campaign will be, or the kind of messaging in the sequence will be the same across all of those reps, but there will be gaps where they can fill in that like personalization information. And it's maybe not personalized all the way down to that account, but by segment. So like VPs of whatever in industries like yours often have this problem, we can solve it, that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. And it always encouraging like that 20% of like your effort be really specialized, like being uber targeted for the right types of people in that book, you know, where it's like, that's where I definitely like your VPs, your high level people, your top like 20, I want to land these accounts, get opportunities in them, like get company like specific, and get your customer case studies, because we go like after expand and cross sell and new. And so we've got some really like great customers that we want to grow. We go after at a BDR level, like how to like that 20%, you should definitely be putting in like examples of what we're already doing with that company here, because it's like the biggest goal that you could ever share. And
Makes
it has
sense.
to be in that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So we've been chatting about how the information goes back up from sales development back up to marketing. So you've mentioned it's kind of a combination between this data that you'll collect through this type of experiment that we've been chatting about, testing out the messaging across all those different industries or different markets. And then if they work, that like confirms, goes all the way back up the ladder to marketing. That's a check mark. This one's good. And if there are any bottlenecks that are not kind of rep specific, the whole campaign has a bit of an issue, then that goes back up and those tweaks are made and you kind of rework it following that same matrix map through the teams. Yeah.
I'd say like along with that though, when there are issues, like I think a big question to ask is it the campaign or is it like like, are we going like big, like this whole thing needs to change, or is there an adjustment? And I think sometimes I see a lot of confusion between like marketing and sales and sales development and marketing, when it's like this whole thing's not working. And if you poke enough and you dig enough, it's like, okay, it's actually the first couple sentences and a handful of emails that they don't like. And that's fixable at a micro level. And it, you know, or we miss the concept of what the campaign was even going to be. And so we're not going to throw the entire thing away. But we've definitely seen some gaps in enablement.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. With so many teams and with so much experience in all these different kind of pieces that go into building a campaign, it makes sense that you wouldn't completely have to throw it away. You guys haven't just somehow managed over the course of several teams in several days or weeks or whatever to just create something completely wrong. Yeah. So yeah, it makes sense that you're just looking at little
sometimes you have
tweaks.
To convince people that that's actually the case. Like, do we really, like, it takes some prodding and poking sometimes, like to like, I think, the closer to marketing I think you are, the more you see like, or maybe up the ladder, I don't know, you see like, we can't throw the whole thing away because we really did believe that this was the right play, like the right way to go 2 months ago. So did the whole world change, which actually did happen this year? Like, and we did do that. Like, did we really call it wrong? And it's hard sometimes depending on whose opinion it is. I think that's why data is helpful. Like, sales and marketing revenue is an art and a science. It's both. I think but for me, the most important thing is to figure out where the problem is, and like to know how to fix it, how big the fix could be if it needs fixing at all. Right. Is this iterating or is this overhauling? Yeah. You know, is this iterating or is this replacing? I don't know.
Got it. So that's kind of how you uncover where the individual issue is. So say you found the issue, you fixed it. Now everyone is like, okay, this is the right way to go. How do you ensure adoption across that sales development team?
I think for me, finding the adoption is actually doing that, is finding like where there's not adoption. Like a big place that I look is just at effort. When like, I know all the things and all the places, all the accounts, campaigns that the different teams could be focusing after, and then actually like seeing, okay, at a very like basic level, how many calls are being spent on those accounts, like are being called into on those accounts, or how many calls have we made in these campaigns, And when I see those gaps of just managing and knowing numbers, then I'm like, oh gosh, like we launched this campaign a month ago and there's like maybe half the calls I would have expected right now based off of our benchmarks. Okay, well then like, why is that? And that's like, talk to my managers. Okay, they may talk to the reps or they have a few things, but I hear a few trigger things of like, well, we're having a hard time with this. And like, okay, like we don't have enough people to prospect. And I'm like, okay, why don't we have enough people to prospect? Who are you prospecting? And me, like as a former sales rep, now sales leader, like doing my own discovery work of like, let me ask open-ended questions. Let me like open this up. But I'm specifically targeting, we've set goals for the campaign at every level of the go-to-market organization. Okay. And so when those goals are missed, is that because, why is that? And is that effectable? And then like unpacking that, uncovering that. And so really quickly, like as an example of like, okay, we've got a couple sub campaigns that we ran from May till now, and saying like one has had like hardly any adoption, and like, yeah, well, we don't really like the messaging. And that's like what my reps and managers will say. And I talk to other people in the other parts of the sales organization, they say something similar. Mm-hmm. Marketing's like, well, why didn't anyone tell me this? But like, what is it? Like, what is the messaging? Well, okay, well, it's actually the messaging and the buyers. Like that messaging doesn't work with these personas. Okay, well, that's a different problem than just the messaging bad. Yeah. Like, is it the copy that's bad, or is it the target that's bad, or they both are bad? And what is bad? Yeah. Like, who defines bad? Yeah. Like, I don't know. Like, can we use other language? Can we be a bit more descriptive? Like, I'm having a hard time with this. And so it's, hopefully you're seeing like, it's all about like asking a lot of questions and understanding a lot, poking at it before we do anything, because some of it may not even be that we need to go up funnel. It could be like, okay, I haven't done enough job selling to my team of why we're doing this or who we're doing it to, or I didn't train them well enough, or I need to pull an enablement to help me here.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That was a really good example you gave of kind of a lack of communication back up the ladder, having marketing say, well, why didn't anybody tell me that this campaign wasn't working for whatever reason? So I think that's a great segue. When working in a company or in your experience, when there isn't that clear communication between sales and marketing, you don't have that set up, what are the kind of common pitfalls and issues that come up?
Yeah. Well, one, you get reps that, like early on in your intro, you said like sometimes sales drives the focus, sometimes marketing drives the focus, sometimes every rep's for themselves. When I find there is that misalignment there, the pitfalls are you're getting reps opting into that scenario where they are just deciding for themselves what to do. And it's not necessarily because they don't, like some companies, they're so young or so new or however, there is no focus and it is all reps for themselves. But then you get to a place where that's just people opt into that, and it's like, how do I get away with that almost and not for any like malicious reasons. It's everyone's honestly trying to find a way to win. Are we all going the same direction, following the same map? We're not. So, and is that the right call? And I think like, who's right? Is there a right? I don't know. But I think there's truth in like everyone's personal opinions of when they just kind of go, I think at our company, we call it going rogue. like, okay, like this whole team's gone rogue. Is it because they don't know, or because they tried and it failed, or they never adopted? But that's usually the biggest pitfall.
Got it.
And I think just to like kind of veering off a little bit of like the why behind it is, at some point trust maybe wasn't there, or trust was broken at somewhere along, because it's like a lack of transparency. I'm coming in, like I said, I've only been this company like about almost 3 months, and I'm just like, I'm just a really blunt person, and I'm like sharing like really honest feedback that I've heard from reps, and so it's like I'm just bringing a different level of transparency, and it was no one intended like thought of like, I'm going to be not transparent cross-functionally today. Like, but it happened. You know, it's might be the case, So how are we like, and I think some of it just changes like, hey, I agree to be unoffendable, or get over offense quickly when it happens, when you call my baby ugly. But are we all in it together? I think our company is like, I'm blown away, despite like every company has their things, of like misalignment. Everyone's got it somewhere. But like everyone, it's amazing how everyone really does want to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that, like, that's the first thing. Like, do you want to improve? Do you recognize that like we can all drive forward? We have a mission as a company. We're all going to it. That's where you got to start. And if you don't have that, get it. And then it's like, okay, well, we all want this. So like how do we get there? And I think communication and transparency is probably the best place to start.
Absolutely. The example you mentioned of the sales reps going rogue, that's such a funny one to me. I actually spoke to a prospect a couple of days ago who said similar to you. She'd come into a new role at a company as a director of sales, and she'd only been there for a couple of months. And when she came in, the reps in outreach had 800 sequences that had been made.
Yep.
She was like, oh my gosh, like, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to know which ones work? Everyone's basically cloning it and changing it every single day in outreach. And she had managed to kind of thin it down to 400 and was just still like reeling at this. And I think that's such a kind of a perfect example of there being this lack of communication between whoever is driving strategic focus and then whoever is executing on that. And having those reps just being like, okay, I know who I'm supposed to be reaching out to. I know what we sell. All right. I guess I'll go from there and just make something up and see how it goes. So that's kind of a very extreme example of what might happen when your reps go rogue. Do you give your reps permission to create their own sequences in outreach, or are they just using the kind of the sequences that are built by that process of marketing enablement development?
Yeah, this topic is so funny. So if any of my colleagues listen to it, I think that call of permissions on outreach is like such a hot button issue that I've discovered here. So it's funny that you bring it up. I resonate with the anecdote you shared. So we've got some, like, there's certain people that for sure have the ability to author and publish their own sequences, but primarily like 98%, it's you can write one or clone one, but it has to be approved by our program team, and the owners of outreach. So you can, but we have to approve the message. I think is a pretty good route to go, because we've got those strategic people that like, and you've got an AE that's like one of the top salespeople in the company that's going after. He's got 5 accounts total that he's pursuing. Like he needs custom sequences and like, who am I to stand in his way when like a good chunk of the company's revenue is on his shoulders? So how do we for me, it's picking my battles and knowing like I can't move a mountain in a day. So like some of that rogue behavior, like what makes sense right now when like, where can I make the biggest impact by streamlining the focus? Like yesterday I was in a meeting with one of the sub teams of my reps, and they were like, they just straight up asked, I'll be super vulnerable on this one, of like, I see people that like rewrite the entire email before they send it out. Is that okay or not okay? And I'm like, what am I supposed to say? Like, like you're admitting to me like, no, you're not supposed to do that. Like,
it's a template for a reason, but
but then like when they have valid points of like things that they want to fix, what do I do? And that's where like me then triggering some of that cross functionality of like, okay, like, but is there a bigger problem that like a few people have in my organization we need to fix, and how quickly can we fix it? Can I work with programs and campaigns to like make some edits because they're bringing up some things that are not a preference, they're a need to be successful. And I don't know if this is the best advice to give for anyone listening, but it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. It's like, I'm like, I wish you hadn't told me that you rewrite every email, because now I know.
Yeah.
But are you doing something in your stuff that actually works really well for you, that like is maybe messing up some of our conversion rate metrics and stuff, but that I could look at, and that might actually be like really cool for us to see, is that scalable to a lot of people? Like, is that a really good rewrite? And that's where it's like, how do I tote the line? But like, I've been a rep, I've rewritten emails, and my play was to just become like the leader and like move up the ladder so I could just affect those things and write the emails that I wanted to write, but how do I enable and encourage the creativity on the team, not break the rules, have streamlined success, be all things to everybody, and guide like creativity, but have a direction for marketing. It's a lot.
It's a lot for sure. I think that's something that's so tough because sales, as you've mentioned, is this art and a science that it's a combination between data, but then at a certain point, you are a human being reaching out to a human being. And so the data isn't always going to reflect the way things are going to go. And it's sort of this thing that has to be kind of like malleable and nebulous and be able to adjust at any given moment. But if you're part of such a massive sales organization where there's a process for these things and it kind of has to be validated through a couple of different teams, it's not such an easy fix. So you sort of got to...
So on that, like, so my whole data concept of like, okay, buy all of our campaigns and sub campaigns and showing the effort and having data driven, I love that. But then when you get some of this rote behavior, like what if the data doesn't back up the opinion? But what do I do when I have an entire team and multiple teams of people that are all in violent agreement that there's a problem and the data isn't backing it up? Like, because that happens sometimes. And that's, again, where you have to get into discovery and understand what the real problem is. And where like, okay, well, so everyone here like rewrites parts of that or has just decided to do that, and that's why it games the numbers. And maybe it's not always the case, but like how can that be? But it does happen sometimes where your numbers quite aren't there, or it's like the benchmark, we're hitting the benchmark, but our benchmark is off. Like that's actually low. We could do so much better. I don't know. But,
I think it all comes down to these kind of just testing all these different things, and every single company has got to validate their own outbound strategy. We could give all the suggestions in the world from your experience at all your different organizations and predictable revenue, having worked with hundreds of companies, and it's still, they're a great framework. Generally now people know what a sequence should look like, or kind of length of time or types of wording that works, but it's still going to come down to figuring out exactly what works for your company.
Yeah. And that's why basics, like when we're talking about the beginning of this session, is like back to basics is so important. Is we can lock those things in, like good, like what activities should be done, what things should we have when we pursue it, an account, what, like knowing what our campaigns are, having that cross-functional alignment. Those things are so important because of nuances of every company. Like without having those things down, it's harder to have some of those intelligent conversations of why isn't this working? Because then if you don't, then it's easy to finger point of like, well, you aren't doing enough calls, and you're not doing enough of this, and well, you're not following up here, and which is always going to happen. But if we get the basics down, we can have a little bit less finger pointing and a little bit more strategizing and like going in the right direction together.
Amazing. So. I think that's a perfect place to kind of wrap up the episode. I think that puts a perfect kind of bow on it.
Cool.
I do have one last question for you. And that's, of course, you've learned so much at your different roles. You've worked for practically every single part of a sales organization as a whole. What is the kind of one universal thing that you've learned, if anything, from working in different size sales teams for different parts of the sales org? What's the kind of the tried and true thing that does work?
Oh gosh. I think the first thing that comes to mind, it might be a bit more to like big picture visionary, but like the thing that does work for me is just choosing to find a way to win. No matter what role I'm in, like finding out what success is, what good is, and then like trying to exceed that. Like if we've got a problem, how do we win in this problem? We're not aligned. How do we be aligned? This isn't working. How do we make it work? Always choosing to, like, we're never done. We've never arrived. We get to keep going. And me being resilient in that and self-initiating, but also welcoming and constantly moving in the direction. I think my managers now, even just in the short time that we're working together, are probably sick of this, but like even with our best practices, we could always get better. We're never done learning. And that's worked for me in every role in every area because it applies everywhere. But we can always get better. we're doing that. It's not, I suck, but we never stop. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. There's always room to grow and improve.
yeah.
Amazing. Well, Kim, it's been a pleasure having you on the show for the second time. You've got so much
Thanks.
hands-on experience working with every single team across large and small sales organizations. So it's amazing to hear your perspective on how all the teams can work together in the most effective way to drive cohesion and alignment across the organization. If people want to learn more from you, where can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage, please follow me on LinkedIn. There's a few Kim Browns out there, but Kim Brown at QuickBase. Love for you guys to follow me. I've got a blog series on cold calling and top of funnel best practices that I post on LinkedIn. Love for you guys to check that out. And then also, hopefully you're seeing, like, I think I know what we're doing and we're moving in a direction, but like I said, we're always learning. I'm always trying to find a way to win. So I welcome feedback and thoughts sent to me. Let's all be in this together.
Awesome. Well, Kim, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast. Have a good one.